Welcome back everybody, I'm Jaran Khabi, your host, and today I'm going to react to a video called The History of Sub-Zero, Noob Saibot, Mortal Kombat 1 edition by the YouTube channel History Behind the Warrior. Now for new updates and content you can visit the links in the description down below, and let's get started. Enjoy.
Hello everyone, and of course, welcome back to the long-awaited return of the History of Mortal Kombat series on the channel. Now today, with us all of course, counting down to the exciting release of Mortal Kombat 1, I thought that it would only feel right to go back to the roots of the channel and revisit the very franchise that started it all for me 8 years ago. And really, if you think about it, a lot has changed with both myself and the franchise as a whole. Back when I originally did the series, I was flat, monotone, and also didn't know how to pronounce Raiden right. Plus, I didn't go into as much detail as what I normally do now. So, when tackling these newer episodes, I didn't simply want to rehash what those older episodes have done. Instead, I wanted to build all of these episodes from the ground up with new scripts, more sources on information, and absolutely no reliance on what I have previously said. Not that I think I could physically watch those older episodes, because oh boy, good old 720p renders. Now, with a new age of Mortal Kombat coming in, and the timeline effectively having been reset once more, it's pretty confusing and jarring of where to go and what to follow. Are the movies canon? Which version of Mortal Kombat 3 is truly canon? How many timelines are there? Is MK vs DC canon? Well, to actually break up and make more sense of the canon, especially for newer fans and viewers of this series, this video will be broken up into two halves, with this episode primarily being the history of Sub-Zero and Noob Saibot, solely revolving and being focused around Bi-Han, his rise as his clan's elite assassin, and his fall as Noob Saibot. But there will be a second accompanying video called The History of Sub-Zero, Tales Across the Multiverse, which will be a video that allows me to cover each and every other version of this character across multiple different timelines, ranging from games to comics and even movies. Thus, I do think that this will help separate the main timeline canon from that of the expanded one, giving you all a more well-rounded idea of the multiple different interpretations of Sub-Zero across Mortal Kombat media. Also, quick note, I'm purposely only focusing on Bi-Han today because his identity of Sub-Zero is known, whereas we don't know the identity of who is under Scorpion's mask. And since currently we only know that they are brothers, then we're just gonna have to presume that it is Kuai Liang for the time being. So with that said, and all out of the way, let's begin with what I would deem to be the golden age of Mortal Kombat, the original timeline and run of the series, of which many adaptation and future installments would base each game and movie off. Now, Sub-Zero himself would be forged by the creative minds of John Tobias and Ed Boon, the founders of the franchise, with John himself really being the one to etch down the idea on paper, simply titling the character as Ninja, before then working to create an origin story. Little did he, or I think anyone would actually know, how big of a character this very simple conception would lead to. The creative process of actually creating Sub-Zero is a very intriguing one, because in extremely early drafts, this character was conceived to simply be a Japanese ninja. But as Tobias studied and learned more about ninjas, having come across China Ninja Connection, he decided to expand on this singular ninja in a big way, choosing to actually split him into two different characters, coming up with the concept of it being a tale of two brothers, where one looks to escape the clan, whereas the other has overthrown it by killing their father. Sounds eerily similar to something else, doesn't it?
Die like my father!
But this particular idea and plot thread would be sidelined and used much later on for the Cyber Initiative with Mortal Kombat 3. Plus, during this time period, they would actually settle on calling the character Tundra, before then settling on Sub-Zero. Of course, this nickname and title would be given to Sub-Zero's younger brother, Kuai Liang. So now, this takes us to the original origins of Han. And to really understand his character and his upbringing, we must go far back before the events of the very first game, to paint a picture to truly understand just how he ticks, as the arcade era of games was fairly light in terms of storytelling and what each character brought to the table here. Now, the origins of both Bi-Han and Kuai Liang all stem from their father, who, to this very day, is left unnamed. This mysterious figure was a devoted follower of the Lin Kuei's beliefs and teachings, as the Lin Kuei themselves were an infamous assassin organization, one located in China that was built on theft and assassination. As part of each member's commitment to the clan, they would be tasked with traveling across the world to then find women to have them fall for their gaze, before conceiving a child with them, and then subsequently bringing back new soldiers for the Lin Kuei. Thus, this would happen to the two, with the American mother and sister being left behind, never being seen again by the duo, or even being mentioned. So begins their time in the Lin Kuei. And I will note that the details of their upbringing is little too unknown. However, from what we are aware of the new initiates, is that the training regime that was forced upon the children was insanely brutal. So much so that it was very common for many of them to die, culling out the weak so the strong could survive, with Bi-Han and Kuai Liang being a duo that thrived through it all. In due time, the pair learned how to utilize their previously unknown Cryomancer lineage, very quickly rising up through the ranks, with Bi-Han himself then being dubbed as Sub-Zero, whilst Kuai Liang was given the name Tundra. Again, whilst the details are quite sketchy, in later installments, it is implied that Bi-Han developed a form of resentment towards his younger brother. For what reason? We don't really know. It could very well be his nature, but it is much to the dismay of Kuai Liang, who does have an undying love to his brother. Eventually, Bi-Han's incredible talent and skill does place him at the very top of the organization, being seen as their best assassin, so much so that it was a name that would become familiar even outside of the clan, even to the denizens of hell. So this now takes us to the first real canon game in the franchise, Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero. In this installment, the Lin Kuei would be approached by a mysterious figure by the name of Quan Chi, a demon of the Netherrealm that sought to acquire what would be known as the Scroll of Elements. During this task, Bi-Han would be successful in acquiring the scroll, but it was with much resistance, having been forced to battle Shaolin and even a rival assassin. But that assassin was no mere stranger. It was Hanzo Hasashi, scorpion of their rival clan, the Shirai Ryu, whom he was forced to kill. Upon returning back to the Lin Kuei's headquarters, is when Bi-Han learns of who the contractor was, and that he was responsible for Scorpion's interference. This rubs Bi-Han the wrong way, wishing to no longer take part in any work from the Necromancer, but his hand would be forced by the Grand Master. then being sent to the Temple of Elements to acquire an ancient amulet. But again, this was no simple task, as the temple itself would pit him against ancient elemental gods that were tasked with protecting it. Through frost and bloodshed, he would persevere, but after he defeated the gods and reached out to the amulet, it would be snatched away by Quan Chi, then revealing the true identity of the amulet. But it was a vessel for an ancient fallen elder god by the name of Shinnok. And before Sub-Zero can do anything, he would be confronted by Raiden, who is understandably furious at the naivety and ignorance of the Lin Kuei. To right his wrongs, Bi-Han would travel to the Netherrealm in order to return the amulet. But this path would truly test his skill, fighting the souls of the damned, including a recently resurrected Hanzo Hasashi, now but a mere spectre to the Necromancer. In his defeat, Quan Chi would pull out all stops, sending out his horde and even his royal guard, made up of Serena, Jaya, and Jadka to defeat him. But all fell before his hand, with the only one being spared being Serena. Eventually, Bi-Han is able to get his hands on Quan Chi, defeating him alongside Serena, who herself has been long yearning freedom from the Netherrealm. But just before she can get it, Serena would be struck down from behind by Shinnok. With nowhere else to go, Bi-Han must now battle a fallen Elder God. But knowing that he was outpowered, the Cryomancer uses his cunning mind to outsmart the god, laying claim to the amulet and slipping through his grasp. But when he returns back to Earthrealm, he feels a form of uneasiness, something that followed him through the Netherrealm. Although, yes, he was successful, he would be haunted by words Quan Chi uttered, that he was tainted by evil, which is why he was so ideal to be sent there by Raiden. To which, then, the Thunder God does admit that Quan Chi was indeed correct. But he does somewhat reassure him that it would be up to Bi-Han to choose the path he walks down. Now, near immediately after this, once Bi-Han returns back to the Lin Kuei, he would be sent out on another mission, this time as a participant and representative of the Lin Kuei in Shang Tsung's tournament, Mortal Kombat. So yes, this does indeed take us up to the events of the first game, having taken place during the arcade era of games. Details and narratives surrounding this time was particularly thin. Now, Bi-Han is one of the 7 characters playable during this time, with the sub-boss being Goro, the Shogun Prince and reigning champion of Outworld, with its mediator and final boss being Shang Tsung. How the tournament unfolds is largely left unknown, but we do know that the Shaolin prodigy known as Liu Kang would go on to reign victorious. However, in winning, the island then began to crumble, and as Bi-Han would try to retreat, he would again be confronted by his enemy, Scorpion, still bitter of his demise and that of his clan. The two would clash once more, this time with Hanzo killing the Cryomancer, marking the end of Sub-Zero. But this didn't necessarily mean the end of Bi-Han, because between the events of Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2, as foreshadowed by Quan Chi, his damn sword would be cast to the Netherrealm, and much like Hanzo, he would be turned into a minion of Quan Chi, a wraith branded as Noob Saibot, obviously a homage to the two creators of the series, with their names being flipped backwards. Now reborn under this new mantle, he was but a mere puppet of the Necromancer, having him now, ironically, align with Shinnok, who had been lurking in the shadows, plotting as Shao Kahn waged his war with Outworld. Here, the Brotherhood of Shadow was made, with Noob Saibot having travelled out to the second tournament, watching and observing this tournament unfold, as he would relay information to his masters. Although not playable in Mortal Kombat 2, he would be a hidden secret battle. Following the climax of Mortal Kombat 2, where the Emperor would be defeated, the angered Shao would defy the will of the Elder Gods, unleashing complete war and chaos on Earthrealm during the events of Mortal Kombat 3. Here, Bi-Han would actually side with the Conqueror, being ordered by Shinnok to gain his favor into the realm of man. But instead of acting on Shao's orders, Noob continues to play a very passive role during this game, as secretly they are plotting, planning, and waiting for the best time for Shinnok to strike. And during 3's many iterations, at first, Noob is once again a hidden character, but from Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 onwards, does become a fully fledged character, now selectable and playable on the roster. With the Emperor's defeat and Edenia free, this takes us to Mortal Kombat 4, where the Brotherhood of Shadow would finally strike in the aftermath of this chaos. With Shinnok free, every realm was caught off guard, unready in the fall of Shao's defeat. But despite their careful timing and planning, the Elder God was simply no match for Liu Kang, being defeated and cast back to the Netherrealm. As for Noob, well, fortune seemed to favor the Wraith, as during this time, Scorpion would turn on Quan Chi, chasing him across the realm, which in turn released his grasp on Bi-Han. During this time period, although Bi-Han is most certainly active, he is not at all present during the events of Deadly Alliance, choosing to embrace his free will. But even so, he is still tainted by the darkness of the Netherrealm. Thus, evil still remains in his heart. And we do get to see that in action when he crosses paths with Goro, during a battle between Outworld and Edenia, to which the Shogun have sided with the Edenians. The prince would be ambushed by Bi-Han, being beaten into a bloody mess, and Bi-Han loved it, as he experienced his first real taste of freedom. No shackles and no bonds could finally tie him down. Tired of simply being a pawn in someone else's plan, he seeks to create a new empire in his name, one loyal to him and his own ambitions of conquest. So during the events of Mortal Kombat Deception, Bi-Han turns his gaze to Outworld to acquire an old friend and ally that was decommissioned by Shao, the Lin Kuei unit LK-72 Smoke. Here, Noob would boot up the unit, reprogramming Smoke to only be loyal to him and him only, as his dreams turned towards Smoke's nanotechnology. Seeing the ability to transform people on a cellular level, Noob would weaponize Smoke's nanotech to form a future comprised of both steel and demon, with him at the head of this new order. But upon exiting this fortress, he would be graced with a very familiar figure, Kuai Liang. At first, Bi-Han does try to avoid his brother, slumping away to the Netherrealm, but after being pursued, he and his cyborg would strike him down, overwhelming the new Grand Master, before then revealing his true identity, wanting Kuai Liang to know who was responsible for his death. But before he can be split in two, they would be attacked by Serena, now engulfed by her demon form, and it forces them to retreat. But they would encounter her later on in order to learn the location of the new Lin Kuei's headquarters. This finally takes us up to the last installment of the Golden Age, with Mortal Kombat Armageddon. After the Deadly Alliance crumbled and the Dragon King had fallen, a new and final threat peeked over the horizon, the War of Armageddon, a stage set forth by prophecy to be the end days of all in the universe. And the countdown clock had finally begun. During this period of time, Noob would learn of the Lin Kuei's new home, storming it with Smoke to enslave his brother's students, twisting and turning them into his demonic puppets. And it was a near success, but there was one thing that the two couldn't account for: the Edenian demigod Taven. The emissary of Armageddon was not only able to defeat his army, but also both him and Smoke. Now rendered unconscious, Bi-Han would take the time to nurse his brother back to health, to have him reclaim the person he once was before he had fell. But this dream was ultimately all in vain. His brother had escaped, next making his final and last appearance during Armageddon itself, battling the forces of light to his dying breath. And everything would change from this point onwards, with Mortal Kombat 9 serving as both a sequel as well as a reboot to the original canon. A dying Raiden sends a message to his past self, giving the series a fresh slate, whilst simultaneously tweaking and altering some characters in both design and in origin. For Bi-Han and Kuai Liang, their origin does seem to be tweaked a tiny bit from that of the original canon. It looks like the duo simply grew up in a normal family before then being kidnapped by the Lin Kuei. And whilst only ever briefly touched on, the events of mythology do occur here. Now, Bi-Han makes his very first appearance extremely early on in the game, once again under the Sub-Zero mantle. Here, he participates in the first tournament on behalf of the Lin Kuei alongside Sector and Cyrax. His very first fight is in fact against Sonya Blade, who is pursuing Jax. And she causes quite the upset, defeating the Cryomancer in the early periods of the tournament. He then makes his next and final appearance as Sub-Zero during Scorpion's chapter, where he confronts the Hell Spectre, who has been tarnishing his name. To ensure that this was their final bout, Scorpion would quite literally drag Sub-Zero to the depths of the Netherrealm, where both ice and fire would clash. And it seems that Hanzo's flickering spark is just bright enough to fall through Sub-Zero's offense. But in his victory, at first, Hanzo would spare him. That is, until Quan Chi arrives. To push his puppets, the Necromancer would cast a horrific illusion of the Shirai Ryu's demise, with Bi-Han leading the charge no less. But even in this timeline, it's all sadly but a lie. So as his pleas fall on deaf ears, Hanzo would pry away his mask and kill Bi-Han. Now of course, much like the original canon, Bi-Han would later return, but now under the Noob Saibot mantle, working alongside Emperor Shao with Quan Chi as his master. He makes his very first appearance during the climax of the second tournament, where he's appointed to stop the likes of the Shaolin duo, Liu Kang and Kung Lao. But his boldness does get the best of him, as he would be defeated and partially recognized by Kung Lao. Now, his loss would actually later lead the Shao Zone. Spiteful and understandably bitter, Noob would travel out to the desert alongside his master to then resurrect Sindel. So then begins the invasion of Earthrealm and the start of the Mortal Kombat 3 section. He makes an appearance very early on, this time during Cabal's chapter, thwarting his attempt to confront Shao Kahn, but unaware of his speedster skill and his own cybernetic enhancements. He and Melina would be defeated by him as he slips through their grasps. As the battle goes on, he is appointed to guard Quan, as he is forging a Soulnado to tear apart Earthrealm. And it's here where the fates would align, and he'd finally be confronted by his brother, Kuai Liang, now cyberized by the Lin Kuei. The new Sub-Zero would try to appeal to his older brother's better nature, but that cold, callous heart still remained, remarking that despite their blood, they are not brothers. So the two would clash in their new forms, and much to his own surprise, it is Kuai Liang who is victorious. Noob then makes his final appearance in MK9 when he is battling the Shaman Nightwolf, having been kicked and presumably torn asunder in Quan's Soulnado. But this doesn't truly spell the end of him, as he would resurface decades later in Mortal Kombat 11. Having survived the Soulnado, Noob would align himself with the vengeful Titan Kronika, having promised him an age of darkness with him as its leader. So with vengeance in mind, Bi-Han would seek his own form of justice against both his brother and Scorpion, now having been reverted to Hanzo Hasashi, and he would purposely take his time to strike, as the two were attempting to stop Frost's new Cyber Lin Kuei, at first catching them off guard, but Bi-Han's arrogance causes him to underestimate their joint strength, as he would be defeated by them before then slipping away. His next appearance here is during Jax and Jackie's chapter, where he has been assigned the mission of guarding Kronika's crown, amassing quite an army, but eventually his defense crumbles and the crown is taken. Now Bi-Han makes his last canonical appearance during the splintered timeline of Aftermath, where the island section is revisited, but this time, instead of battling Jax or Jackie, he would take on the likes of Fujin, a rematch that has been a long time coming. But unlike their first encounter, it is the Wind God that is victorious here. Following this point, Kronika is once again defeated, and the timeline is reset by Liu Kang. So, with a new age and dawn on our hands, the heroes of old are restored back to their prime, with Bi-Han now not only returning to the Sub-Zero mantle, but having become the new Grand Master of the Lin Kuei, having overthrown his father to do so. And despite the Lin Kuei's honorable tasks of being loyal defenders of Earthrealm, his ambitions here continue to remain very selfish, as he seeks to take the clan in a very new and very different direction, one where they serve themselves. But with his brother Scorpion not seeing eye to eye with his vision, it looks to be only a matter of time before they inevitably have to battle. So no matter what timeline they seek to be a part of, their titles seem to be doomed to clash in every reality. So now, the real question is, where do we go from here? Well, we simply must wait and see with Mortal Kombat 1. So with that said everyone, I hope you have enjoyed this video and found it very informative for you more newer viewers to the series. The Mortal Kombat franchise is a very large one, so it can be pretty daunting on knowing where exactly to get started in it. How to begin, what is canon. Mortal Kombat simply takes place in a lot of different forms of media. So I do hope you have enjoyed this ride, as there's plenty more episodes coming your way, especially with the new companion series that will be touching on the unexplored canon that exists beyond the main continuity. So with that said, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting. Take care everyone, I'll catch you all soon.
So that was the history of Sub-Zero, Noob Saibot, Mortal Kombat 1 edition. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the fact that the warrior took Sub-Zero's story and added his backstory to it and incorporated every single game throughout the franchise. As we know, the original Sub-Zero was killed by Scorpion because of a lie that Quan Chi told him, and later resurrected as Noob Saibot, and the fact that Kuai Liang took over the mantle of Sub-Zero and trying to reason with Noob Saibot to bring him to his former self. I love every single story, the way the warrior told it, and I love Noob Saibot's voice in Mortal Kombat 11. Seriously, where Sub-Zero and Scorpion confronts Noob Saibot, that exchange, oh man, that is brilliant. I'm going to look at the second episode that the warrior mentioned, and I'm looking forward to that as well. And a word of wisdom for today. There's no such thing as I can't. Rather say you can. Have a blessed day further, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.